The Americans converting to Orthodoxy are not choosing a better argument. They're going after a faculty and they'll tell you that themselves if you read what they actually say instead of what everyone assumes. Here are the numbers because almost nobody covering this bothers with them. 20 parishes across 15 states, under 100 conversions a year through the 2010s, then 155. 62% of them under 40. The biggest single group is men in their 30s, unmarried, and most of them are coming out of Protestant churches. Priests are describing catechism classes that went from 12 people to 150. Parishes that doubled, some that tripled. Now here's the part that should stop you. These are people leaving churches that handed them a Bible in their own language, with the sermon explained, the doctrine simplified, the music in a style they already like. And they're walking into a service that's 2 hours long, half of it sung, some of it in a language they don't speak, where you stand the whole time and fast half the year. They're not converting towards something easier, they're converting towards something harder. Whatever they're hungry for, the easier version didn't have it. So I'm going to do 3 things. I'll show you the 4 explanations everyone gives and why not. One of them survives contact with the evidence. I'll show you what the converts themselves say they were looking for in their own words because it's the same word every time. And then I'll tell you what that word actually means and why it's happening in this decade and not some other one. This is why America is becoming Orthodox. Let's be precise about the size of this because both exaggerations are floating around. American Orthodoxy is small, 2 to 3 million people in roughly 2,000 parishes out of 260 million Orthodox worldwide. You'll see people online claiming it went from 700,000 to 6 million. That's not true, and you should distrust anyone repeating it. The real story doesn't need inflating. Small is exactly why the inflow shows. Pour 400 converts into a denomination of 60 million and nothing moves. Pour them into a parish of 90 and the priest can't hear confessions fast enough. And it arrives in 2 waves. First, single men, then a couple of years behind them, young families with 3 and 4 children. That second wave matters more than the first because a single man can convert on enthusiasm. A father moving his whole household has counted the cost. 4 explanations are in circulation. Each one is partly right. Not one of them gets you to the end. The first is the aesthetic, the edits, the chant over drone footage, gold and candlelight, and the face lit from one side. And yes, that's real, it works, and it's how a lot of them first hear the word, but an edit gets a man to the door. It doesn't get him into the water a year later after the fasting rules have been explained to him. The second is masculinity, beards, monks, hierarchy, a religion that tells you to pick up a cross and die daily instead of asking how you're feeling. Also real, also not sufficient. There are 12 places online right now selling hard masculine discipline, and they don't require you to confess your sins to a priest and give up meat on Wednesdays. The third is politics, that this is reaction, young men going right, looking for something ancient and unbothered by the present moment. Some of that is in the mix, but politics doesn't survive a 2-hour vigil. Nobody stands through Holy Week for a political position. The fourth is community loneliness, and a parish that feeds you true everywhere and true of every growing religious group in history, which means it explains nothing specific to this one. Look at what all 4 have in common. Every one of them describes the door. None of them describes the room. They tell you what got a man's attention. They do not tell you why he stayed after it. Stop being interesting. For that, you have to ask him. So here's what the surveys and the interviews turn up, and it's remarkably consistent. 65% of converts from a Protestant background give theological reasons, not aesthetic ones, theological. And when you look at which doctrines they name, 2 come up over and over: the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And a word most Western Christians have never heard from a pulpit: theosis. Ask directly, young converts say it like this: a real spiritual life, not a truer set of propositions, not a better community, a real one, as against something they'd been doing that they'd concluded was not real. And Metropolitan Saba, who leads the Antiochian Archdiocese here, says the same thing from the other side about what they're walking into. Not an idea, a lived experience. Now hold those 2 sentences next to each other, because between them is the whole thing I want to show you. One says, I wanted something real. The other says, this isn't an idea, it's an experience. Neither of them is talking about being convinced. Both of them are talking about perceiving something that's a different faculty entirely. Believing is something you do with your mind about a thing you cannot reach. Perceiving is contact. And these people are telling you plainly and repeatedly that what they went looking for was contact. Here's the claim, and then I'll show you it's older than the argument about it. Christianity has always taught that there's a way of knowing God that isn't thinking about God, not a feeling either. A perception with its own organ, which can be trained the way an ear is trained, and which is dead in most people because nobody ever told them it was there. Read the New Testament with that in mind, and it's everywhere, sitting in plain sight. Paul is not saying the man is stupid or wicked. He says the man cannot perceive. It's an equipment problem. And the equipment has a name in the letter to the Hebrews. Senses, exercised by custom, that's training. That's a man doing reps. And Christ says what the trained faculty is for in the plainest sentence in the Gospels about it. Not believe in. See, the Western mystics never lost this. Eckhart preached that there's something in the soul uncreated and that God is nearer to it than it is to itself, and he was tried for it. Boehme, a shoemaker with no schooling, described a light breaking in on him and spent the rest of his life writing what he saw in it, and the clergy of his own town ran him out. That tradition stayed alive in Europe. It just stopped being the thing you'd hear on Sunday morning. The East kept it on Sunday morning. That's the whole difference. It kept an entire technical vocabulary for the trained perception, kept the practice attached to it, kept saying out loud that the point of a Christian life is that a man is actually changed, not merely forgiven. So when an American walks into that liturgy and comes out saying he felt something he has no words for, he's not having a mysterious experience. He's meeting the thing his own tradition kept in the attic. Now, the harder question, and I want to be careful here because this is about something lost and not about anybody's villainy. Somewhere in the Western story, faith changed jobs. It used to mean fidelity, standing with someone. Then gradually it came to mean assent, holding a proposition to be true that you could not check. And once faith means that, notice what's happened. It's been moved inside your head. It's become private. It's become, in the exact sense, subjective. That's not my reading. It was written down a century ago by a man watching it happen. And here's what he saw following from it. Once faith is a private inward holding, it can no longer make any claim about what's actually out there. The territory of the real gets handed over completely. Whatever the instruments can measure is what exists, and religion keeps the leftovers: morality, sentiment, community, comfort at funerals. Then look at what the same page identifies as the turn, written around 1911, naming the exact doctrine that these converts in 2026 say they are running from. Because that's the finding, and I don't think people have sat with how strange it is. Ask them what they left, and the majority of Protestant converts point straight at justification by faith alone. 100 years before any of them were born, someone identified that same turn as the moment faith became subjective and lost the world. They are fleeing precisely what he said would empty out. They've never read the man, they just got hungry. And I want to say the thing plainly, this is not the story of a theft. Nobody sat in a room and took perception away from the West. It fell out of use. A faculty nobody trains goes quiet. Then a generation later, nobody remembers it was equipment. And by the third generation, the word for it sounds like poetry. So why this decade? Hunger like this has been possible for 200 years. Why is it cashing out now? Because something in the modern soul has crossed a line and belief is no longer enough for it. Understand what a strange demand that is. Historically, for most of Christian history, a man could live his whole life on inherited belief and it held. He was born into it, he never tested it, and it carried him to the grave. That arrangement has stopped working. And not because people got more wicked or more distracted. Something in the structure of consciousness changed. The modern man cannot rest in something he only believes. He needs to know. That was said in 1908. Man will demand knowledge and not faith. And in 2025, the primate of an American archdiocese describing why his parishes are filling up. Not an idea, but a lived experience. Those are the same sentence. One is a prediction, the other is a field report, and there's a century between them. So this isn't a fashion, and it isn't a reaction. What you're watching is a soul condition arriving on schedule and finding the one address in Western Christianity that still keeps the equipment in working order. You can test this on yourself tonight, by the way. Ask yourself honestly whether you could live on a belief you knew you'd never verify. Sit with it. Most people under 40 find they can't. That inability is the whole phenomenon, and you're carrying it around. Now, a warning, and it's aimed at the people most likely to be watching this. If the aesthetic is what brought you, the aesthetic will not keep you. There's already a name for what happens next in every parish absorbing this wave. The men who came for gold and beards and a hard religion hit their first Lent or their first confession where the priest doesn't flatter them, or the first year of standing through services they don't understand, and they thin out. Because the thing actually on offer isn't an identity. It's a practice, and the practice is aimed straight at the part of you that you'd rather not have touched. Fasting isn't about food. It's about discovering in week 2 exactly who you are when you don't get what you want. Confession isn't therapy. It's saying the true sentence out loud to another human being, which is why people avoid it for years. Order and hierarchy and ancient vestments are the scaffolding. They're not the building. And a man can spend a decade admiring scaffolding. So if you're standing at that door right now, the question isn't whether orthodoxy is beautiful or older or more serious than what you left. The question is whether you actually want to be changed, because that's what's being offered, and it's the one thing nobody can do to you without your consent. Which brings us to the word they keep naming, the one that isn't preached in most Western churches: theosis. Not that God forgives you and the books are balanced, that God became man so that man might become God, that the human being is meant to be so filled with the uncreated life of Christ that he becomes by grace what Christ is by nature. Not admiring him from a distance, not even imitating him, being made into the same kind of thing. That's what these converts found and didn't have a name for. And notice it's the same claim as everything else in this lecture from the other end. Perception can be trained because the human being can be changed. The organ opens because the man is becoming something that has that organ. And the whole point of the trained sight is not knowledge for its own sake. It's him. That's the road. It ends where it always ended. Spirit and soul and body. 3, Paul counts to 3 there, and most of us were raised counting to 2. So here's where I'll leave you, and it isn't a conclusion because nothing here concludes. You don't have to convert to anything to start. The faculty is standard equipment and it responds to use tonight. Before you sleep, sit still for 10 minutes and say one short prayer slowly enough to mean it, and pay attention to what does the attending. That's the first rep. Do it for 40 days and you'll understand more about why America is filling those churches than any video can tell you. The door was never locked. It's just that nobody's been leaning on it.